This presentation is supported by our regional water supplier, Tarrant Regional Water District. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean it to meet drinking water standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, and Mansfield, to provide water conservation programs for the community. Conservation is an important water supply strategy to help meet the needs of a growing population. There are currently 2.3 million people in Tarrant County, and this is expected to double over the next 50 years. This is why TRWD supports many programs that help save water through outdoor watering and gardening education. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. If you are a resident of Tarrant County, you can sign up for a free sprinkler system checkup where a licensed irrigator comes to your home and provides a comprehensive evaluation of your system with recommendations to reduce water waste. There is also an event calendar where you can find important information about future classes and workshops. TRWD also partners with organizations like Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and the Tarrant County Master Gardeners to provide educational programs just like this one. Be sure to check out SaveTarrantWater.com and sign up for their free services.
Well, I'm sure most of you know about honeybees, but how many of the other pollinators that are very important to our not only agriculture, but our different ecosystems here in Texas and the rest of the world are? I bet there are some that you may not realize that are actually important for pollinating. So what is a pollinator? It's simply something or someone that can move pollen from one flower to another flower, and that way it can get fertilized. Otherwise, we can't have new plants. And one of the things I have not mentioned in this presentation that I'm not going to really talk about, but is wind pollination, because that's not what we're talking about here. Wind pollination occurs for a lot of plants, especially grasses. But I'm going to talk about animals that pollinate. Okay, so why should we worry about pollinators? Pollinators are in trouble, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Habitat degradation, less habitat, and when they do develop, a lot of developers, instead of just building on a piece of property, they scrape everything off, so that removes a lot of habitat and pollinators on that property. Even if they're just going to build a house, they scrape the whole property off. Pollution, obviously, is a problem not only for pollinators, but for any other kind of animal. And there are pathogens and pests and diseases that are crossed back and forth through the trade of plants. Pesticides have become a real big problem. And a lot less pollinators now because of pesticides. If you go across town, even, or across on a trip in your car, it used to be that you'd have to stop and clean off your windshield all the time. Now, you may have 1 or 2 splats on your windshield. Well, that might seem good as you're traveling across the state, but that means there are a lot less pollinators out there. Another problem is climate change, whether you really view that as a problem or not. It certainly is for pollinators. Things have changed a lot, and the ecosystems where different pollinators are used to colder weather, they have changed because of the more heat. So why should you care? Well, I'm sure a lot of you heard that 1 out of 3 bites of your food exists because of pollinators. And not only your food, but the food that your food eats depends on pollinators. So if you eat beef or pork or any other animal, maybe not fish, but all those animals, those land animals, depend on plants, which depend on pollinators in order to keep going. Healthy ecosystems also depend on pollinators. Without pollinators, again, no plants for the future. And those plants are what help with erosion control, with clean air, and the like. And a healthy economy depends on these pollinators. Agriculture depends on pollinators to keep going. They cannot exist without pollinators. Otherwise, they cannot produce the food that we need. And not just food, but there are other materials that we use plants for. Okay, everybody knows honeybees have been in trouble, but what else should we know about and be concerned about? Did you know that bats are a huge boon for pollinating nighttime plants, night blooming plants? Agave, a particular agave that we use if you want a margarita, agave is the plant that is made for used for making tequila. And bats are what pollinate the tequila. I mean, not the tequila, but the agave. You can look at this little bat on the right, and you can see all that yellow on him is covered in pollen. And that's how the agave gets pollinated from one to the other, because he sticks his nose in the flower. He has to put almost his whole head in there in order to get the nectar. And so when he goes from one flower to another, it transfers that pollen. Okay, birds, they're also a huge pollinator, but there's only one in Texas that is particularly important. Orioles do pollination too, but not so much in Texas. The one pollinator that's important here, I bet you might be able to guess it from this plant, being a coral honeysuckle with long tubular flowers. What can get into that? The hummingbird. As you can see on this picture, the hummingbird will stick its beak and its long tongue, which you might see at the end of that beak in this picture, to drink. And the stamen that's outside of the flower drops its pollen on its forehead. And so it goes from one flower to the next, pollinating and drinking as it goes. Beetles. Did you know beetles are a major pollinator? Most people don't think of beetles pollinating, but they do quite a lot. And a lot of them are called flower beetles. You see these beetles here, you can tell that they crawl all over the surface of the flower. And so doing, they get pollen attached to their bodies and then transfer it to another flower. If you look at that Kern's flower beetle and the yellow flower at the top, it's like it's almost his whole body is diving into the flower. One thing you need to note, beetles, most of the flowers they are attracted to are ones that smell kind of spicy rather than sweet, maybe a little bit musky, or smell like overripe fruit. Those are the beetles, the flowers that the beetles really like. And flowers that beetles go to are ones that have tougher petals and stems so that it can support all those beetles running around on top of it. Sometimes beetles are referred to as mess and soil pollinators because of the way they crawl all over the plants and they eat, and then they leave frass behind before they go to the next one. Wasps, and a lot of people are scared of wasps, but most of the time wasps are not going to hurt you unless you're swatting at them. There are other ways to avoid wasps if you're worried about them. Blowing on them instead of trying to swat them will help get them away from you. But wasps are really a huge pollinator. There's over 33,000 species of wasps in the world that pollinate at least 960 different kinds of plants. And some of those plants depend solely on those wasps. Many beetles, wasps, and bees have evolved with different plants, and sometimes they only like the bee or insect will only like a particular flower, and vice versa. The plant will only accommodate that particular organism in order to get pollinated. And without that particular pollinator, that species will no longer exist eventually. And wasps contribute like $250 billion per year worldwide just as pollinators. And they also do another thing. I'm sorry, they also do another service for plants, and that is they eat damaging plant organisms like aphids. So they protect crops that way. And that service is usually seen as about $416 billion annually worldwide. So wasps, next time you look at a wasp, think of how much it really means to the world. Flies. If you look at these, a lot of people wouldn't see them as flies, but these are what are called bee mimics, and they're flies that make themselves look like bees in order to not be bothered by other organisms. They don't sting, there's no stinger on them, but they also provide a great service for pollination. I mean, look at how well these not bees, flies look like bees. I'm sorry. Also, these flies not only pollinate, but they also will feed on plant eaters like aphid larvae. Moths. You don't think of moths too much because most people think of moths as flying at night, and there are flowers that bloom at night. Like I mentioned before, bats do a lot of that pollination. But some of these are out in the day, like the hummingbird clearwing moth on the right. And these other two moths, the police car and the yellow collared scape, those are out during the day. And the white-lined sphinx moth, which a lot of people call that also a hummingbird moth because of the way it flies. And I was asked one time, what is that little hummingbird there? Is that a hummingbird baby? No, it's a moth because it flies just like hummingbirds and hovers over the plants, and they have a very long proboscis. And these moths do a great service in providing pollination. So one thing you might not realize, these sphinx moths, the clearwing and the white-lined sphinx moth, and there's some other sphinx moths, they have a particularly big caterpillar that a lot of people see as a problem. And one of those sphinx moths is this one. the tobacco hornworm. Also, people also might think of the tomato hornworm, which both of these hornworms will eat things like your tomatoes, your peppers, anything in the nightshade family. But instead of trying to kill those caterpillars because they're eating your vegetable plants, think about planting a Jimson weed or angel trumpet, because that is its natural or native host plant. So if you plant those near your vegetable plants, they really prefer that native plant to your vegetables. But if you do get some on your natives, you can just transfer them to this plant in order to save the hornworm and get the sphinx moth that is actually a wonderful pollinator. It does a lot of pollinating, and they're fun to watch. This angel trumpet is an evening bloomer and blooms, excuse me, blooms throughout the night and into the morning. In the morning, when it starts getting too sunny, they close up. But one thing I really enjoy watching the sphinx moth in at the angel trumpet in the evening, you also see a lot of other bees and other pollinators coming to it, and they'll sit and hover over that closed bloom and just wait for it to open. At one point, I was watching a big bumblebee trying to get into the bloom, and it just kept hitting that bloom. And finally, when it barely opened, it flew in and got its nectar and then tried to get out and kept punching it, trying to punch its way out, and finally was able to get out when the flower opened a little bit more. But they get real excited when those flowers are opening. Butterflies are another large group that people not necessarily really think about them as pollinating, but they do. They fly all over getting nectar. So, of course, they're going to gather some of that pollen as they're going. So, we've got large butterflies like these that go all over the place, but then we have some smaller ones too. These little small butterflies do a great job on the smaller flowers. The red admiral is more of a medium-sized butterfly. But the other ones here are much smaller, especially that blue one in the upper right-hand corner. You can barely see the flower it's sitting on. That is a frog fruit flower. If y'all know or familiar with that, that flower is not but maybe a third of, well, not that size, but a less than a dime size wide. So that's a very teeny butterfly. And then there's a pearl crescent, which is just a little bit bigger than that. And the sulfurs and the skippers, all of those are fairly small butterflies, but they all provide a great pollinating service. Not to mention, we just enjoy watching them flitter around. Then one of the best pollinators is our native bees, and they're even more efficient at pollinating than the honeybee. The advantage that honeybees have is that there are a lot of them, and they are in hives, and they could be managed and taken to orchards, excuse me, orchards or farms in order to do pollination. And because of the mass number of them, they can do a lot of pollinating. But per bee, per insect, native bees do a much better job of pollinating. Sorry. Native bees, I can't find my note. They do, I think, like $19 billion a year in pollination of crops. What they do also is their life habit. Most of these are not hive plants, I mean hive bees. They are single uh, solitary bees. So the only, not only, but the main bee that is a native bee that is a hive bee is the bumblebee. And their hives are not that big, not near as big as honeybees. They have much smaller hives, and their hives are usually in hollows in the ground where they use burrows that other animals have made previous years, or they could be in hollows in trees. And many of these bees, since they don't have hives, they don't have the stingers, or at least they may have a stinger, but they're not as apt to sting you because they're not trying to defend their home. So you don't need to be afraid of them as if you saw a bunch of honeybees and you were near their hive. Even the honeybees are not going to sting you unless you're messing with their hive. So people are more afraid of bees than they need to be. Just respect them and don't be swatting at them. So how can we help all these wonderful pollinators that do so much for us? Well, we need to provide a lot of different types of flowers. You want to have a succession of blooms. That means things that bloom from the early spring all through the growing season into the fall. And there are some flowers that even bloom in the winter which help some of these pollinators when the weather warms up for a few days. You want to have different shapes of blooms and different colors of blooms because different pollinators are attracted to the different shapes or the different colors. Like I said, the hummingbird wants tubular flowers so it can put its long beak in. So here are some of just a few spring bloomers. So you can see the crossvine, that's going to be attracting the hummingbird. And even that columbine will attract a hummingbird. Also, many pollinators are attracted to the smell as well as the color. Like I mentioned, the beetles are attracted to certain types of smells. And that's why flowers are producing all these things, is to attract those pollinators. They produce certain smells in order to attract a certain pollinator or a certain color to attract them. And then here are some that may start in the spring, but continue on until summer. And many of these may start in the spring, then stop, and then flower again later on. That's what they call a pulsar, where they bloom, go to seed, and then they'll come back. Here are some ones that usually start in summer or late spring. And again, here's the flame acanthus with the tubular flower that attracts hummingbirds. Another name for that is hummingbird bush. And if you have one and there are any hummingbirds around, you'll see hummingbirds protecting that bush in order to keep it for themselves. They are very territorial. And again, there's the angel trumpet. Like I said, the sphinx moth love those flowers, as well as all kinds of other bees and pollinators. And another summer flower I love is the Wright's skullcap. Most people are familiar with the pink skullcap, but Wright's skullcap is native, and it's actually native to our area. It's hard to find sometimes, but there are nurseries that are now starting to carry it. So if you can get it, I would get it. And it's evergreen, so it's a great plant. So that's another one that would be good for those pollinators that might show up on a warm winter day. Then summer through fall, the lantana is one of those pulse flowering plants where they bloom and then they'll go to seed and then they'll lose their seed and then bloom again, and they'll keep doing that until frost. And it not only do the butterflies like that Gulf fritillary and other bees and the pollinating flies like this, but also hummingbirds. I've seen hummingbirds on that. It's hard to tell, but those little flowers have tiny little tubular flowers on them. So hummingbirds love that as well. And then something that blooms in late fall is gay feather, not late fall, late summer and early fall. And purple coneflower blooms on and off. Usually once it starts hitting 100 degrees, I usually cut mine down, because even if it has a bud on it, when it opens up during those 100-degree heat days, the flower is just turns kind of gnarly. It doesn't really do a good job of providing anything. So I cut those down so it gets a better root system, and then it'll use its energy to bloom again strongly in the fall. So you can see right there, there's a beautiful little leaf cutter bee on that coneflower. And leaf cutters do a great job of passing along pollen. Oh, there's something I forgot to mention on our native bees. You can see how furry they are. Well, except for the carpenter bee, it's not very furry, but the two on the eastern carpenter bee is very furry, but the one on the left, the black one, is not so much. And the longhorn bee, both of those have very furry parts to them. And that bee, the longhorn bee, you can see on the back of its leg, it intentionally puts that pollen on them, on their back legs, to take it back to feed to their young. So they may take a lot of pollen to do that, but of course, not all of that pollen stays on their legs or on their furry bodies. So that's how they transfer the pollen to other plants, and it really does a huge amount of pollinating services for our plants. Anyway, I forgot to mention that. Okay, back to this. And then in the fall, here's some great plants that bloom in the fall. The one on the left, the frostweed, as you can see, those can get fairly tall. I like them in the shade. They don't get quite as tall in the shade. And I also like to cut them down a couple of times before July to get them bushier. The ones in the picture had not been cut down, and those were blooming. I think the picture was taken in October, but it's a very important plant for the monarch, because the monarchs are coming back down through our area, and it's blooming right at the right time for the monarchs to get their sustenance they need to carry them on through to Mexico to overwinter. So frostweed is of huge importance to monarchs, as well as some other fall blooming plants. And something you might not think of, grasses are very important for pollinators, because even if they don't pollinate them, they often use them for cover. So in fall, the grasses help to hide them, and then in the winter, hide them and keep them safe so they can last until the next spring. Then we also have Turk's cap, which does start blooming much earlier than fall, but it's another one of those that blooms, starts in, might be starting to bloom right now for some people, and then it will last all the way through till freeze. So think about when you're planting things, not to have just a mass of one color or one type of plant, have drifts of different plants so that you can feed all the different pollinators throughout the season. If you just plant a monoculture, even one or two things or three things, you're not feeding the whole spectrum of pollinators. You want to make sure you have as much as possible in order to keep them going. And if you can't do it yourself, or maybe you can get together with some neighbors in order to have different types of plants. Something else we need to think about, we think of bird baths for the birds, but those bird baths can also serve the purpose for our pollinators. I don't know if you've ever had a bird bath. You may see different pollinators on the edge sipping water, bees, butterflies, beetles. So there's that. And also, you don't have to have a full-blown bird bath. You can have just, this is a rock here on the left that has a little kind of hollow in it, and you can just splash some water in there. Just make sure whenever you have these water sources to make sure that you're not providing a source for mosquitoes to lay their eggs in. You make sure that they're cleaned a couple of times, like every other day or so, and put fresh water in it. But there's other ways to do it besides these two. I know somebody that just uses a saucer from a dish, from a plant, a potted plant, and puts water in that and just empties it out every day and then puts in fresh water, because there are a lot of things that, and then lays it on the ground. There are a lot of things that like that. Another thing you want to think about is you don't want to have to clean every stick, every dead branch up during the fall and winter, because those are great places for our pollinators to hide for the winter. Or in this case, this was late winter when I came across these little bees, these little longhorn bees on dead chili pekin plant. You can see the little seed head on the left. That's a little dried up chili pekin on the bottom left corner. But these little bees were out there in the evening resting. These are solitary bees, so they don't go to a hive. They just find some place to sit at night. So this provided a great place for them to rest. So again, if you can, and you're not worried about your neighbors complaining that your yard is looking ratty, provide some space for these insects to rest. Also, if you can't do that, if you can clean up, if you feel like you must clean up, use the sticks, especially the hollowed sticks, to make things like this. Great bird, not bird, but pollinator hotels. These are just a couple of samples. You can go as simple as you want, like the one on the right, even simpler than that. Those, I believe, are just different stems from bamboo, and there are different sources you can go to online that show you how to put them together. And if you watch, there are a lot of master gardeners will have classes on how to build these things. And it's not that difficult, and kids can really love to get into building these as well. The one on the left was built by students at the University of New Hampshire, and they just were trying something out and going to use that as a science project, see what is using that. But they get all, you can see how big that is, because those are cinder blocks there on the bottom all filled up. And that's another thing you can do, is just, if you want to go even simpler than the one on the right, is get a cinder block and just put a bunch of sticks in there. You do want to look at where you're putting things, because which way it faces, because some pollinators prefer an east facing bug hotel, or they, because of the way the light is, or it might be something else. It just depends on what pollinator you're talking about. But there's all kinds of interesting looking pollinator houses out there. Okay. And this is a list of just some of the resources I used in putting this together. The Xerces Society, if you're not familiar with them, they are trying to, an organization that tries to help get pollinators, insects in general, back to numbers that will still help the planet, because right now insects of all kinds are in peril. Texas Parks and Wildlife is a great place to look, because they not only have information on pollinators, but all kinds of Texas animals and Texas native plants. They have their own list of Texas native plants that you might find helpful. And NRCS, which used to be soil conservation, now they're into all kinds of just helping farmland, and our natural resource conservation is to help mainly with our agricultural system, but they do have a lot of information that the average person can get. So there's a lot of information online. You can go there to just Google pollinators of Texas, pollinators, night pollinators. Any way you want to look it up, you'll find tons of information. I also would suggest that you go to iNaturalist. Even if you don't become a member, you can go online and there's all kinds of information and photos. If you find something in your yard and you're not sure what it is, iNaturalist can help you find out what it is. And I think that's about it for now. Does anybody have any questions?
If you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A. Or if you like, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you so you can ask Annie any questions that you might have.
No questions?
I guess you covered everything.
I don't think so.
No, you did a
should
great
have gone
job.
on more on some things. I just
Oh,
got
wait,
tied.
I see one now. Does frostweed like full sun?
It can take full sun, but it tends to look droopier because of the heat in full sun. It'll do fine. It just won't, in my opinion, look as nice as it does in the shade. And there's so many things that bloom in the sun. I like to use it in the shade because it does bloom in the shade so well.
Okay. And Nancy Searle wants to know, is hardy fall aster a good pollinator plant?
Oh, yes, most definitely. I don't know if you noticed a lot of some of those pictures that I had, that's what they were on, or fall aster.
Okay. What are some local nurseries that carry the native plants?
I should have put that on the list. Well, Weston's, if y'all are familiar with that, is one.
Yes.
On the south side of town, southeast side, on Anglin Drive. Eco Blossom, that's one you have to contact them and arrange. You can order, they will deliver. You can order online or call them. But you can go there, but you have to make an appointment to go there. Let's see, there's Native Gardener in Euless. There's Nativo, Nativo in Fort Worth. I believe that's on the north side of town. What is the name of that nursery that came to talk to the Nestor Gardeners a couple of months ago? I can't remember. Do you remember?
I can't either.
But it's in Haltom City. So if you look up Haltom City,
it was Going Wild or something like that, wasn't it?
Something like that. But if you
Yeah.
look up online in Haltom City, there's one. And more, even the big box and Callaway's places, they are using some native plants, but you need to be careful because a lot of them use pesticides, which that's one thing I can't believe I skipped. Pesticides is not to use pesticides if at all possible, because you're going to hurt your plants. There are organic ways that you can get rid of pests, and most pests, they're not going to do a whole lot of damage. If your yard is in pretty good balance, you're going to need some of those pests because they feed the good pollinators and the good bugs, and they feed birds and their babies. So if you go too crazy with the pesticides, you're going to kill all the beneficial bugs as well. So try not to use the pesticides unless you really can't get rid of a problem and it's really bothering you. A lot of times, if you just spray them with a hard spray of water, or use things like ladybugs and lacewings to eat those things, then your problem will be solved, if not right away, eventually. It's usually because there's a big imbalance that you have a big problem. If you look a lot at some of these pictures, this last picture here I got, if you look kind of on the bottom quarter of that picture, there is a big Turk's cap leaf with a hole in it. We don't mind that at the Wildscape because that means something's getting fed and something that it's is going to feed on it, most likely, that ate on that leaf. So it's all about the circle of life. So try not to use pesticides. And I'm going off on my getting on my soapbox here.
Okay. How close do pollinator plants need to be to vegetable gardens?
Well, there are a lot of plants that are just intermixed with vegetable gardens, like marigolds. It's not a native plant, but it's a good plant for peppers and tomatoes. The one that I mentioned, the Sphinx moth likes, the datura, the big white angel trumpet. It doesn't need to be that close to it. It could be several feet away, 10 feet away. So it depends on what you're trying to do. But the more flowered plants you have around, the more pollinators you'll have, and the more different kind of pollinators you'll have. One thing that I should have mentioned as well, I may have to do this whole thing over again at some point because I was just a little off my game tonight. A lot of plants, and in particular tomatoes, need what they call buzz pollination. Honeybees can't take care of those because they don't buzz pollinate. Bumblebees are what buzz pollinates. Our native bumblebees take care of our tomatoes. They come in and they vibrate at a certain frequency, which shakes the pollen loose. So, and that's how those get pollinated. And if you don't have bumblebees, this is something I learned from another farmer is you get an old motored, what do you call those toothbrushes that you, battery operated toothbrush. You put the back of the head of the toothbrush on the back of the flower and turn it on, and that will buzz pollinate your tomato flowers in case you don't have bumblebees. And apparently there you get a pretty good success rate with that. But that's a lot of standing out there buzzing those flowers yourself. I'd rather have bumblebees. And bumblebees are really attracted to mealy blue sage. So if you want them near your tomatoes, I would say plant things like that are blue, and particularly mealy blue sage, near your tomatoes.
Okay. Concerning the native plant locations, there's Grow Wild and there's Walker's in Haltom, according to Betty Zonker. Yeah. Grow Wild and Walker's in Haltom
Good
City.
to know.
What were
Ann,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Dick. I was just going to suggest to Ann if she'll send me the list you just spoke to everyone, and we can add that in the follow-up email.
Okay, I will.
Thank you.
Okay.
Certainly.
What were the good plants for spraying in addition to the columbine and crossvine you mentioned?
Oh gosh, let me think. Let me go back to that so I can jog my memory. I'm sorry. This is not working. Well, there are a lot of other plants, but this I just barely touched on plants that bloom in different seasons. Let's see here. There's one plant that's a native that most people don't even think about that blooms very early, and it's called crow poison. A lot of people think it is an onion, a wild onion. It's not. I don't know if it's related in any way. I'd have to look that up. I keep meaning to. But it looks a lot like a little wild onion. It has tiny little white flowers. And then there's also wild onions that bloom in the spring. So those are all good spring bloomers. Crow poison is one, if you were walking along a wild area, you'd see it growing pretty easily in the spring. They start pretty early. Let's see what else grows. Carolina jessamine blooms fairly early. I'm drawing a blank. I'm not good. A lot of times I'm not good about pulling up the file in my brain that has different plants. I have to sit down and figure it out. And I'm sorry about that. I seem to be missing some stuff. Anyway, if you can try, it's columbine. I don't know if you heard columbine. There's also a columbine called it's a red columbine. It's called Columbine canadensis. It is a Texas native, and it's more native to this area. The yellow is actually originated from the Trans-Pecos area, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what it is. But the yellow one has a smaller bloom, but in mass, it does have a really pretty look to it. The plant itself looks very similar to the yellow columbine, but it also blooms early in the spring. That's a great one. And there are also ones that people have crossed the two of those together to get columbines, and sometimes, most of the time, that's by accident. In fact, our own greenhouse head, Josephine Keeney, has grown some, and we sell them in our plant sale in the fall. the Wildscapes plant sale.
Okay. Jill says Iowa State University's done some research with adding narrow strips of prairie to farmland to encourage pollinators. Have you heard of any farmers implementing this procedure?
No, I haven't, and I meant to look up that information, but as I was telling our crew before, I'm bad about waiting till the last to procrastinating. And I had heard about some college, and I didn't remember which one it was, where they were doing that. But I know there's a good series, not a series, a show called Kiss the Dirt, I think is the name of it. Woody Harrelson had narrated it. It starts out pretty bleak at first, but keep watching because it gets better. It talks about a lot of different integrated farming methods and how important soil is. And of course, pollinators are part of that. And they're showing a lot of farmers, not the big farmers, the corporate farmers, but family farmers are doing more about taking care of the land and not using up the land. And part of that is about the pollinators. But was it Iowa State that you said? Who was it that asked the question?
Yes, Iowa State University.
I'll have to check that out. But I also had seen an article several years ago, and I wish I had saved it, about where some states up in cities in the northeast were where they have power lines, they were changing the land underneath it to be more like prairie. So they'd have pollinators and it would be good wildlife habitat. So I thought that was pretty cool too.
Okay. Colette says native plants and organic-based plants, ladybugs, etc., are available at Marshall Grain in Colleyville.
Yes, that's right. I forgot about that place.
And Margaret Shipping says there's a Nativo, Nativo Gardens.
Yeah, that's the one I said.
Yeah, 1512 Northwest 25th Street.
And they're a nice young woman that heads that. I follow them on Instagram. They have got a lot of good stuff.
Nancy Searle, what about winter honeysuckle?
Winter honeysuckle
is an early bloomer.
It is an early bloomer, but it is also on the invasive list.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
and a lot of people think, oh, it's not invasive in my yard. Well, it's not your yard we're worried about. It's wild spaces we're worried about, and agriculture we're worried about, because the birds, they eat the berries and then they'll carry those berries long distances, like up to 50 miles. And I don't know if any of y'all are aware of Southwest Nature Preserve. I know some of you are, but they have had problems with the winter honeysuckle there and trying to get rid of it because it takes over the native plants. So unless you're willing to get out and cut off the berries, then I would not use it. But that's my own look on things.
Okay. I think that's the last question that I see. Does Rooted In carry a bunch of native plants also?
I think I've heard that they do, but I'm not sure. I haven't shopped with them.
Okay.
I would think they would, because they're the ones that supply the plants for those boxes.
Yeah, I know they do.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Any more questions? right. Well, let's see, make sure there's not any. Okay, the evaluation form link is in the chat box. If anyone would like, the webinar chat, if anyone would like to go ahead and fill out that evaluation. As mentioned, Nancy will send you a YouTube video where you can watch this program again, and she'll also send you an evaluation form in 2 or 3 days.
Oh, and Debbie Stilson, I just noticed the name of the show I was speaking about is Kiss the Ground, not Dirt.
Oh, okay. I wondered what that was.
Yeah. It's really I thought it was a great show, but anyway, I highly recommend watching it.
All right. So if there's no further questions, we thank everybody for coming.